Penny left her voice memo running by accident. I want to be clear about that part, because without it, the rest of this sounds like I was snooping. I wasn't. She had set her phone face up on my kitchen counter while she washed her hands, and the little red waveform was still moving when I walked back in from the living room to grab my water glass. I didn't even understand what I was hearing at first. Just her voice, low and tired, talking to nobody. I should have said something. I didn't. That's the part I still think about. Penny and I had been best friends for 6 years by then. We met the way most people in their mid-20s meet people they end up caring about, tooch, accidentally, in a context that should have been forgettable. A work happy hour I hadn't wanted to go to. My coworker had dragged me to this bar on West 4th, the kind of place with exposed brick and overpriced cocktails and a playlist that takes itself too seriously, and I was already planning my exit when someone sat down next to me at the bar and said, without looking over, "You have the face of a man who's been here 11 minutes and already regrets every decision that led to this." I looked at her 14 minutes. She finally turned. Was the extra 3 worth it? I thought about it. Jury's still out. She smiled like she'd expected that answer. Her name was Penny. She worked in industrial design 2 floors above my office, and within 40 minutes, we had talked about her complicated relationship with her mother, my failed attempt to learn Portuguese, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from living in a city of 8 million people and still somehow running out of things to do on a Saturday night. I gave her my number. She texted me at 11:47 that night with a podcast recommendation and the message. "You seem like someone who can handle being challenged. Start at episode 3. That was it. That was the beginning." After that, Penny was just everywhere. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet, daily way that sneaks up on you before you've thought to name it. She'd text me a photo of a weird cloud on her walk to the subway. I'd call her when my landlord did something insane. We had a standing Thursday night thing. Takeout at my place or hers, depending on who'd had the harder week, which we determined by a completely unscientific competition we called Worst Thing That Happened, a game we'd invented approximately 2 weeks into knowing each other and never stopped playing. Other people noticed before I did. My coworker Greg once said, with the specific energy of someone who thinks they're delivering news, "You know you talk about her, like she's the main character in your life, right?" My older sister met Penny once at a birthday party and spent the entire drive home asking me questions I didn't want to answer. My friend from college, Patrick, put it less diplomatically, "You're down bad, man. It's painful to watch." I always had the same answer for all of them. It's not like that. I believed it, mostly. Or I believed it enough to keep not doing anything about it, which is a different thing, but it does the same job. Here's what I told myself. Penny and I worked because we didn't complicate it. She had dated a couple guys in the time I'd known her, nothing that stuck. I'd done the same. When those things ended, we were always the first call for each other, which I chose to read as evidence of the friendship and not as evidence of anything else. I was very good at choosing what to read as what. The night of the voice memo, Penny had come over because she needed to not be alone. Her roommate had moved out 3 weeks earlier. Not badly, just a life-change situation. Her roommate had gotten engaged and was moving to Portland. But it had left Penny's apartment feeling like a place that echoed. She'd been eating dinner alone for most of a month, and she said it was starting to get in her head. She brought over ingredients and made pasta from scratch on my kitchen counter while I sat on the other side and tried to be useful by staying out of the way. It was raining outside. She had flour on her forearm at some point. The whole apartment smelled like garlic and butter and whatever candle she'd brought over because, as she put it, my apartment had the scent profile of a responsible adult who bought a coffee maker but never got around to ambiance. We ate on the couch. We watched half a documentary about deep-sea fish, which she chose, and she fell asleep about 20 minutes in with her feet tucked under her and her bowl still on the cushion beside her. Barely empty. I turned the TV down and sat there in the stupid, soft quiet of it, not wanting to wake her and not entirely sure what I'd do if she was awake anyway. Around 11 she stirred, apologized for falling asleep, checked her phone, and started getting ready to leave. That's when she put her phone down on the counter and went to wash her hands, and I went back toward the living room to turn off the lamp. And I heard it. Her voice. From the counter, low, A little rough the way it got when she was tired. Don't know why I can't just say it. It's not like I think he doesn't know, kind of. Or maybe I do think that. God, I don't know. I just. A pause, some rustling. It's been 6 years and I'm still having this conversation with myself, which is, that's embarrassing. That's genuinely embarrassing. And the fact that I'm saying that into a voice memo like a person who processes feelings through audio journaling now is, okay, moving on. The point is, I keep thinking that at some point it would just stop being the way it is, like it would burn itself out. But it just. She stopped. Started again. It doesn't. It's just him. It's always just him. And I don't know what to do about that, because if I say something and it goes wrong, I lose the only thing in my life that's never. Then I heard the water turn off. I stood very still in the hallway between the living room and the kitchen, and I made a decision. I turned around and went into the living room and sat down and stared at the dark TV screen for the few seconds it took her to come back, pick up her phone, and not notice what had happened. She said goodnight. She put on her jacket. I said, text me when you're home, the way I always did. She said, obviously, the way she always did. And then she was gone. I sat with what I'd heard for longer than I should have, not because I was deciding what to do about it. I hadn't gotten there yet. I was still back in the hallway, replaying the specific way her voice had sounded when she said, it's always just him. There's a tone people use when they're not performing something, when they're not hoping to be overheard. I'd heard Penny perform a lot of things over 6 years because she was funny and quick, and she used both of those as armor when she didn't want to be looked at directly. This wasn't that. This was the version of her she kept underneath all of it. I did not sleep a lot that night. I lay on my side and looked at the wall and had the same conversation with myself about 17 times, and it went approximately like this. I could have misread it. She might not have been talking about me. The him could be someone else. I didn't believe any of those. I just liked making myself go through them because it felt responsible. The truth was simpler and harder than that. The truth was that somewhere in the last 6 years, without ever making a decision about it, I had stopped being able to imagine my life without Penny in it. Not in the background. Not as a Thursday night person. In it. The kind of in it where her name is the first one that appears in your head in the 2 seconds after something happens, good or bad, before you've even processed the thing itself. I had spent a long time deciding that wasn't the same as the other thing. That night, for the first time, I let myself drop that argument. She texted me at 12:07 a.m. Home. The subway was a whole situation. Tell you Thursday. I typed back, glad you're safe. Thursday. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and thought about what I was going to do next. What I did not do was wait until Thursday. I texted her in the morning and said I'd bring her lunch. This was not unusual. We did this sometimes, but she could apparently tell something was different because she wrote back, everything okay? And I wrote back, yeah, just wanted to see you. And she sent back a single period, which in our specific communication system meant something between noted and I'm watching you. She worked in a building downtown with a lobby that smelled like new carpet and corporate ambition. I showed up at noon with sandwiches from the place on Spring Street that she liked and found her waiting near the elevator bank, in her work clothes, a blazer she'd rolled the sleeves up on, hair a little, like she'd been running her hands through it. She looked like someone who'd also not slept that well. She saw me. You look terrible, she said, which from Penny was affectionate. You're one to talk, I said, which also from me was affectionate. We found a bench outside. The kind of October day that can't decide if it's finished summer, bright and cool at the same time, pigeons conducting their investigations nearby. She ate half her sandwich before she asked, so what's up? I'd been deciding how to start this for about 14 hours. Every version I'd rehearsed felt either too big or too careful, and the careful ones were the worst because careful was what we'd been doing for 6 years and look where that got us. So I skipped the rehearsed part. Your voice memo was still running last night, I said. Penny stopped mid-bite. I didn't look away. When you put your phone down to wash your hands, it was recording. The pause that followed was long enough that a pigeon wandered past us, concluded we weren't going to be useful, and left. Penny set her sandwich down on the bag in her lap. Her hands were very still. How much, she said, not a question. Enough. She closed her eyes, not dramatically. The way someone closes their eyes when they've been bracing for something and it finally arrives. I wasn't, she started. Stopped. I know, I said. I know you weren't trying to say it. That doesn't make it less. No, I said. It doesn't. We sat with that for a second. A cab went by on the street. Somewhere above us, two people were having a meeting through a glass window. Okay, Penny said quietly. How long have you been sitting on that? Since last night. Did you sleep? Not really. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Good. Me neither. What were you thinking about? She looked sideways at me. Don't ask me that right now. I'm asking. Another long pause. She picked up her sandwich again, took a small bite, chewed it without tasting it, I think. Then she put it back down. You know exactly what I was thinking about. I want to hear you say it. That got a sharp look. That's a little unfair. Maybe, I said. But we've been being fair to each other for 6 years and I'm not sure it's been working. Penny looked at me for a long moment. Long enough that I started to think I'd miscalculated this. That I'd pushed too fast. That the careful version had existed for good reasons. Then she said, "It's you, in the memo. Obviously it's you." A pause. In case that was somehow unclear, I didn't say anything right away. I let it sit there in the October air, solid now, no longer hypothetical. What does that mean? She asked. And I could hear the defensive humor already starting to creep into the edges of it, the same way she always deflected when something got too real. Okay, you've gone quiet. That's either very bad or… It's not bad, I said. She stopped. It's not bad, Penny. I turned to face her more fully. I just need a second because I've been rehearsing a version of this since midnight and you derailed it. That surprised a small laugh out of her. I derailed it. You know how you get when something's too heavy and you start preemptively making it funny. I don't do that. You're doing it right now. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then quieter. Fair, can I finish? She gestured. Be my guest. I took a breath. I heard you last night, and I've been trying to decide if I heard what I think I heard, which is a way of saying I've been trying to decide if I'm brave enough to do anything about it, and I've spent a lot of the last 6 years not being brave enough. I looked at the street. Every time I was dating someone who wasn't you, part of my brain was always somewhere else. Every time we had a bad week, and I ended up on your couch or you ended up on mine, I'd drive home at midnight, thinking that felt more like the real thing than anything else I had going. And I kept filing that under we're just very close friends, because that was the explanation that didn't risk anything. Penny was very still. I'm not interested in not risking anything anymore, I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were doing the thing where they got bright, right before she decided whether to let something in or to shut it out. I'd seen that look 100 times and never known which way it was going to go until it went. You heard that memo, she said slowly, and your takeaway was to bring me a sandwich. To be fair, it's a good sandwich. A breath. Almost a laugh. It is a good sandwich, Penny. She turned. Yeah, were you talking about me? She held my gaze for a count of 3. Yes, just the one word. No walk back, no qualifier, no joke closing in behind it to soften the landing. My whole chest, I did something I don't have a more dignified word for. For how long? I asked. She looked down at her hands. That's a very uncomfortable question, rough estimate. Since maybe, she stopped. Started over. There was a thing that happened around year 2. You had a bad breakup, and you called me at like 1 in the morning, and I drove over, and we sat on your kitchen floor for 2 hours eating cereal, and you were so clearly miserable, and I was. She shook her head. I was angry. And I spent about a week trying to figure out who I was angry at, and eventually I had to just accept that I was angry at the situation. Which was the point where I started realizing this might be a problem. Year 2. I'd had no idea. You never said anything, I said. I didn't mean it as an accusation, but it came out with some weight. Neither did you. Fair. We sat with that for a minute. A woman walked by with a dog that tried to investigate our sandwich bags. Penny automatically held hers up and out of the way, which was the most Penny thing. And for a second we were both watching the dog and not each other, and it helped, briefly. I didn't say anything, Penny said, because you mattered more than being right about it. That landed hard. I understood exactly what she meant, and I hated that I understood it because it meant I'd put her in that position without knowing it. You thought if you said something, if I said it and you didn't feel the same way, we'd try to go back to normal and it would just be. She made a small gesture. Haunted. And you, she said. and it was a question more than a statement. Same reason, I said, roughly. She nodded. We're idiots. High-functioning idiots. Is there a difference? I think there's a slight pay bump. She laughed, and it was a real one, the kind that loosened everything a little. And for a moment, we were just us again, sitting on a bench with decent sandwiches on a confused October day. Except that the air between us had a different weight now, and neither of us was pretending it didn't. Then Penny looked at me carefully. So what happens now? This was the question. Not do you like me? We'd cleared that. Not for how long? We'd cleared that too, more or less. This was the question on the other side of the first one, which was, given that we both knew, given that we'd finally said it, what were we going to do about 6 years of careful distance that had turned out to not be protecting us from anything at all? I want to take you to dinner, I said. On purpose. Not as Thursday takeout, not as I had a hard week, keep me company, a real dinner. Penny looked at me for a long moment. You want to ask me out, she said. In front of a building in Lower Manhattan with a sandwich in my lap, I never claimed to have good timing. No, she said. You really don't, Penny. She met my eyes. Do you want to go to dinner with me? She held it for another second. Not hesitation, I could tell, just the particular kind of pause she used when she was deciding to let herself believe something. Then she said, yes. Obviously, yes. I exhaled. She saw me do it and her mouth curved. You were nervous, she said. I was not. You absolutely were. I brought you lunch. I was not nervous. Your left hand has been doing that thing where it taps your knee when you're anxious and you don't realize it. I looked down. My hand was in fact tapping my knee. That's not. I stopped. Okay, fine. Penny laughed again, soft star now, and leaned back against the bench with a kind of exhale that sounded like she'd been holding it since midnight too. 6 years, she said. Not to me, really. Just to the air. 6 years, I agreed. We could have been idiots about this so much earlier. Tragically, yes. She picked up her sandwich finally and ate the rest of it like the world was back on a reasonable axis. I did the same. We sat there in the fall light for another 15 minutes until she had to go back up, and it was ordinary in all the ways our ordinary usually was, and different in one specific way that made all the other ways matter more. When she stood up, she straightened her blazer, picked up the empty bags, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, open in a way that was clearly costing her something, but that she was paying anyway. So, she said. Dinner. Saturday, I said. Somewhere good. I'll figure it out. Don't make a reservation somewhere with a dress code just to be impressive. What if I want to be impressive? Then cook for me. I've seen your kitchen. You have a Dutch oven and 3 kinds of olive oil. Use them. I stared at her. That's what you want for a first date? Me cooking in my apartment? She tilted her head. Is that not where you're most yourself? It was. Objectively, it was. I just hadn't expected her to say it so simply, the same way she'd said everything that morning. Without armor, without the joke closing in right behind it. Just the thing itself. Yeah, I said. Okay. She nodded once. Then she reached over and very deliberately stole the last corner of my sandwich off the bag in my hand, the way she'd been stealing food from me for 6 years without asking, and said, Saturday, and walked back inside. I sat on the bench for another few minutes after she disappeared through the lobby doors. Just sat there in the October air, thinking that this was probably the thing I'd been not quite saying to myself for a long time. Not that something had started, but that something had finally been given a name. It had been called other things before. Best friends. Thursday nights. My first call. The person I didn't want to have a bad week without. Those weren't wrong, exactly. They were just incomplete. I cooked dinner that Saturday. Pasta, actually. Not on purpose, but Penny pointed it out immediately when she walked in and said, Is this a callback? I said I didn't know what she was talking about. She looked at the garlic and butter on the counter and gave me a look. You absolutely know what you're doing. I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either. We ate at my kitchen table, instead of the couch, which felt like a small difference that wasn't. She'd brought wine and a playlist she'd made, which she was embarrassed about when she admitted she'd made it, which was new. Because Penny was not usually embarrassed about things she'd done on purpose. We talked for 4 hours. Not about anything different than we'd always talked about. Her projects, my job, the podcast she'd recommended that I'd finally finished, the trip to Colorado she was planning for spring. All the same things, just without the particular shape we'd always put around them without naming the shape. At some point, she said, "This doesn't feel that different. Is that bad?" I asked. She thought about it. "No. I think I was braced for it to feel strange. Does it?" "A little," she considered. "In the good way. Like the air pressure is different, but I still know where everything is." That was exactly it. That was the word I hadn't had for it. We did the dishes together, which we'd done 1,000 times, and at the end of it, she was handing me the last pan, and I was putting it on the drying rack, and she didn't let go right away when I took it, which meant I had to look at her, which she clearly knew would happen. She said, "I'm going to say something, and I need you to not be weird about it." "When am I ever weird?" "Constantly." "Okay." She looked at the pan we were still both holding. "I'm glad the memo ran. I know that's strange to say, but I'm glad." I set the pan down. "Me too." She let out a breath. 6 years. You keep saying that. It keeps being true, Penny. She looked up. I kissed her then in my kitchen next to the dish rack, in the late Saturday quiet with the rain back at the window, like it had been the whole week, and it was not a movie moment. It was slow and a little uncertain, and then not uncertain at all, and when she pulled back, she was looking at me like she was checking whether it was real, which I understood, because I was doing the same thing. "Okay," she said softly. "Yeah," I said. "Not that different," she said again. But she was smiling when she said it, and this time she meant it differently. 3 weeks later, I ran into my coworker Greg in the elevator. He looked at my face, did a slow study of whatever was apparently happening there, and said, "Wait, did something change with you?" And, "Yes." He pointed at me. "I called it. You called it 4 years ago. I called it and I was right." "You were right," I said. He looked deeply satisfied in the way that people do when they've been patient about being correct for a very long time. "How?" "Voice memo," I said. "Long story." He waited. "She forgot to stop recording," I said. "I heard it by accident." He stared at me. "So she didn't actually tell you?" "Not on purpose. And you still managed to make it take 3 more days. I brought her lunch the next day, a full day later. It was a good sandwich." Greg shook his head slowly, with the energy of a man who has been watching a very slow train arrive at a station for years and cannot believe it took this long. "You two," he said, "are genuinely something." The elevator opened. I got out. I told Penny about that conversation later when she called me on her walk home. She was quiet for a second, then she started laughing. Not the polite kind, the real kind, the kind that made her walk slower when it hit. "A full day later," she repeated. "The sandwich was excellent. You're never living that down." "I know. Greg's never letting you live it down either." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment, just the city sounds around her. The particular sound of New York at 6 o'clock in October, traffic and wind and someone's music from a passing car. Then she said, "Hey, yeah, I'm glad you didn't look away." I thought about that hallway, the waveform on her phone, her voice saying, "It's always just him to nobody." "I almost did," I said. "But you didn't." "No," I said. "I didn't." She said good night. I said good night. And I stood in my kitchen for a minute after the call ended, looking at the pan still on the drying rack where we'd left it Saturday, thinking about how strange and ordinary it was. That 6 years of careful silence had ended not with any decision either of us made on purpose, but with a phone left face up on a kitchen counter and a red waveform still moving. Sometimes that's how it goes. The thing you couldn't figure out how to say, out loud gets said anyway in the one moment you forgot to protect it. And then you stop waiting for the right time, because you finally understand the right time was always just going to be the next available Tuesday. So if you were in my position, you walked back into the kitchen and you heard something you weren't supposed to hear, would you have said something the next day? Or would you have let it go? Let me know in the comments. And if this one got you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.